I'll assume everyone can hear me at the back. I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce two excellent speakers on the topic of health in early childhood education. First, we have Mike Bedford, who has worked in the early childhood education sector since the early 1990s. He established the Wellington Regional Public Health Unit Early Childhood Education Program for Early Childhood Centre Health, which was based on the principle that you can't do health in early childhood education unless you understand early childhood education, in which case you have to understand children. As he was once a child himself, he used that valuable experience to help develop a te whariki design business. Mike has advised on internal and external ECE design from the perspective of children's quality of life and opportunities to genuinely grow, learn and explore. He also has a Master in Public Health and a PhD, both from here, and both at the intersection of wellbeing and education, and has experience with management accreditation systems. He's currently involved in further research and advocacy for children and teachers. Mike, and then following on from there, we have Susan Bates, who is an early childhood education teacher, researcher and advocate. She's worked in dozens of ECE centres, published on bilingual children and the health of children and teachers in ECE. She is the founder of a 2,700 member Teachers Advocacy Group, which has steadily grown in membership on the platform of encouraging a teacher's voice for human rights and equity in the sector, which is much needed. So I think we're starting with Mike, and without further ado, we'll kick off.
Thanks, Lucy. Just checking, sound okay? Yep, that's great. Still red? No, so that's the one. Okay, that's what I was checking. Good. You can hear me now? Okay. Yeah, so just a reflection on something that a person I worked with in public health said to me a number of years ago that I have never forgotten. And she said, you know, in our society, we tend to start off our lives not necessarily having any status, not necessarily that respected, but we gain that as we go through life, as we become children, then teenagers, we get a little bit more noticed, and then we get our jobs and are considered productive members of society. We may get seniority as we move through our work life, but sometimes people who are a little bit older may have difficulty getting employment because perhaps their experience is not recognised. And sometimes we don't treat our elderly with the respect that we should do. But she said, for me, what I grew up with, and she was Maori, she said, it was exactly the opposite. The mokopuna, the taonga, our little ones, our treasure. And we respect our elderly people. We look to their wisdom of years and all that they have put in. She said, right now, I'm sort of down the bottom. I'm just one of the workers, you know, but I'm really looking forward to that time when I've got my little ones around me. And, you know, I can enjoy that respect of being the older person. But today, I want to focus on that concept, that statement, mokopuna, the taonga. Now, last year, we did a presentation that was titled ECE in New Zealand, a hazard to child and teacher health. It had a question mark at the end, and I think we fairly well answered that question to say, yes, some of what we're doing certainly is a hazard to child and teacher health. And we tackled three statements from the Ministry of Education. We tested, we looked at those statements. That our services are in the world's top 3 for ratios and teacher qualifications. That we have 98% compliance with regulations. And that our standards are amongst the best in the world. Unfortunately, at that time, there were some other messages that were coming out in the news media. Just for a quick glance, it was not looking so good. We had also had some surveys, particularly done by Child Forum, showing things like 27% of the teachers in their survey would not endorse their own centre's quality. They wouldn't want their own children attending because of the poor quality in the centre. That's an alarming statistic. Even if you said half of that, it would still be alarming. 15% in a 2014 survey saying they didn't have time to develop relationships with children, and relationships are the core of early child education. No relationships, no quality, but you may have damage. Infants and toddlers, that's definitely damage if you don't have the relationships. 12% reporting their centre was operating in breach of teacher-child ratios. There were some other alarming things, looking at things like workplace-related injuries, extreme levels of stress, bullying, and excessive workloads. And this was backed up by a later survey that Susan had organised through Teachers Advocacy Group that also reported high levels of injuries, sleep disorders, and the 53%, which is a higher number for bullying in the workplace, that one includes observed bullying. But it was interesting that overall 58% for that, but in corporate, where you had more than 5 centres owned, or in kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, it was 62%. An interesting statistic on miscarriages for teachers who have become pregnant since they started working with children at 32%. I think that's a cause for alarm. But looking a little bit closer at some of those standards and our compliance, we get this picture. So were we in the top 3 for ratios? Well, there's going to be a little bit of debate around that potentially, because I've had a response from the Ministry of Education to some things this morning. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But what I found last year when I looked at that is that we were not in the top 10, and that's from less than an hour on the net, just doing an internet search on the top 10. But since then, with a much more careful search, I found we're not even in the top 20, which is rather a long way from top 3. I also did a search for requirements around indoor space. Now, there had been a table released by OECD that was, are you right there?
Yes, right. Sound on right.
Oh, okay. Is that better? Just want to make sure we don't have interference between microphones. Yeah, so OECD put us 29th out of 34 nations, but the difficulty with that is they didn't match the actual wording of the regulations. One thing to bear in mind is that some countries, when they talk about free floor space, what they're actually talking about is free floor space. We don't do that. We decided in 2008 to chuck in the tables and chairs as well. So what that means is that our standard of 2.5 square metres per child is actually needs to be downgraded by about 10%. When you go through all the wording, interestingly enough, in Australia, the States, Canada, and the UK, we were 29th out of 34. Exactly the same as the OECD measure, but that was on different countries. We have the worst in the world minimum temperature standard that I can find, and other poor standards. If you look at the compliance, I found 43% of the centres in my research cohort, the nice people who agreed to do the research, were in fact breaching minimum space, and some of that was due to incorrect Ministry of Education measurements. We have things like 90% non-compliance with minimum temperatures, alarming levels of hearing damage level noise exposure, reports of teachers working in groups of over 50 children, which is madness, I'd have to say. And then have a look at the right-hand column. What are we measuring? How do you get 98% compliance when you're not measuring? This does not make sense. I'm sorry, but I'd have to say that that 98% compliance number was fiction. It does not have the data behind it. A few other alarming things. Just looking at 35% working in groups of 30 or more, and nearly half working close to minimum ratios or at minimum ratios, and again an alarming statistic around noisy centres. Just for a moment though, I'd like to change to something slightly different and talk about chickens. So on my packet of free range eggs, I found these words, that their approach to free range reflected their belief that you need to give hens permission to roam, explore, scratch, shelter under trees, and I think that's great. I really support free range for chickens. I think this is a good thing. However, if you're a child, maybe it's not quite so good. Now, we showed this last year, but when we showed it last year, the 100-child centre couldn't be seen because that's quite a new centre. It hadn't turned up on the Google Earth photograph yet. But you see next to it, we have a busy road, a railway line, a motorway, pretty tough environment for a tree to grow. That green you see around the centres is not grass, it's plastic, because there's no way grass would survive the intensity of the number of children in that space. So how do we find ourselves doing this? Are there any recommendations or rules around it? Well, let's have a look at what the Ministry of Education in their own webpage say. There may be risk from air pollution if your ECE service is located within 20 metres of a busy road, 100 metres of a motorway, or near a railway line or industrial area. So how does this happen? Well, it happens because at the moment, under the current system, it's very difficult for the Ministry of Education to prevent the licensing of a centre that complies with minimum regulations. This advice is not regulation, so it can be flouted, never mind. We must get our licence because we obey the rules. We're going to propose a system that will change that because it needs to change. But just back to the chickens for a moment. Now, I agree, free range for chickens is a really good thing. But if you're an egg, you ain't got no legs. So I'm not sure that free range thing for eggs is going to give them much benefit. However, if you're a child, you almost certainly do have legs and you want to use them. So if you're, say, 3 years old, you're really going to run, aren't you? You want to be able to run places. But unfortunately, our 5 square metres per child outside for children means that in many places you cannot run. It's just too small, too crowded. So you're told to use your walking feet. This is what happens. So that means that you maybe 5 days a week, all of your waking hours, you can't run. So I have to put a serious question around that phrase we used before. Mokopuna, taonga? Seriously? Can we justify this in New Zealand at the moment? Think about that one. And I'm going to hand over to Susan.
Thanks, Mike. Here I am a year later, no better at presenting, I have to say. But I'm here to bring the teacher's voice, and I hope at the end of this presentation you realise how important the teacher's voice is. And I have to do it quite quickly because Mike always runs over time. There's always that kid. I graduated as an ECE teacher in 2011, and I was already not happy with what I had seen as a student. In 2013, I started interviewing my classmates. They were the same. Their stories revealed poor conditions, poor nutrition for children, blackmail and bullying of teachers, way too much paperwork, and teachers just unable to be teachers. Because I'd raised some issues around babies, I'd already been put on the MOE, sending me to ERO, sending me to the Ministry of Health, sending me back to the Ministry of Education treadmill, and decided that something really had to change. So TAG was formed as a place, first of all, for teachers to get advice and to share their stories. But it's become a place where owners, managers, parents, grandparents, and students can look at what's happening within ECE and support each other. It's become a means to get support for changing regulations around space, around ratios, and around group sizes, because I realised 3 years before I met Mike that these were the crucial things that needed to change. Conditions for babies, as I say, that they were really terrible. So at the surveys that Child Forum have done and the survey that I've done, it's revealed that teachers have poor working conditions, they are getting sick and injured, they are being bullied and subject to unfair employment practices. And although TAG's membership keeps rising, it's important to note that many teachers are too afraid to put their name in the membership list, because even liking a post on Facebook can bring negative reactions from some employers. Oh, should have had that one already, sorry. Oh, and I need to mention that as of a few days ago, we had a logo now. So we've joined the branded world. We must be somebody now. The central tenet of any government plan for education should be based on human rights and equity. This Labor government has expressed a commitment to that. If they want to focus on compliance and accountability and measuring sticks and so on, fine, but do this first. This should be the centre of what the regulations are about. Also with employment rights, ECE teachers are certainly having their rights breached in ECE. A volunteer lawyer who joined TAG was with us for 18 months and helped 50 teachers in employment issues. He called it a cottage industry. And the WHO recognises that particular stress of ECE teachers. It's time the sector did as well. Oh. I don't know where I am now, Mike. You'll have to fix me up. There are children who attend high quality services, just as there are children, and they are living in good homes, just as there are children who are in poor quality centres and living in poor homes. We can't use the good to justify the bad. We need to focus on the bad and deal with it. I assumed that in New Zealand, and especially after a year in South America, that every child had the same opportunity for quality ECE in New Zealand. And it's been a shock to me to see how wrong I was. Retention is important. ECE teachers understand the role they have in the lives of small children in their socio-emotional, physical, and cognitive development. Teachers don't leave jobs easily. They are leaving relationships they have built up over time, not just with the children, but with communities and families as well. The importance for relationships, for wellbeing and development of young children, consistent relationships, has been researched, but there isn't much research into how to ensure that consistency in the workplace. I've asked the Minister why the retention data collection was dropped and when it would be reinstated. He answered that this was necessary when you're looking at something like teacher shortage, but he didn't acknowledge that it was necessary for the care of the very young. I've had so many reports from teachers of bad treatment by managers. This is one I just got yesterday. This teacher raised an issue, serious issue of ratios in her workplace. She received a serious backlash from her manager. And she texted me, "I'm going to drop off the key in my uniform tomorrow. I've never done that before. After 15 years in the sector, I'm leaving it." Relationships, as Mike has said, is key to what we do in our job. The serve and return, it takes time, and there has to be an unhurried and calm space in which to do that for children. This is for their development and for language. My survey showed that teachers' relationship with children are the reason they teach, and that's the reason they stay. But one of the major frustrations for them is that they just don't have the time to make those relationships. The relationships with colleagues were generally good, but the relationships with management, not so great. 30% said they had excellent relationships with their managers, 30% unsatisfactory or poor. This is one typical comment. On the whole, the organisations I've worked for don't communicate or demonstrate that they respect or value staff at all. We are a means to an end. Stress is a handbrake on relationships. The bullying is absolutely rife in ECE, and I just want to read one of the teachers' stories that just came in last month. I should say I get these stories weekly and sometimes daily, and it was difficult for me to just pull stories out, so I just had a look at the most recent ones. At my first centre, I was bullied by a centre manager, and this caused huge strain on my emotional well-being, as I hated work, but I loved the kids I was working with. I came home crying most nights, which affected my daughter as I was a single mum then. I suffered depression and anxiety. I was always worried about what I would be picked on for at work each day or what challenges I would face. I challenged her unacceptable behaviour with children, like force feeding them at lunchtime. It was terrible, and I eventually left with no job to go to, as I couldn't take it anymore. Some of the other responses from teachers told me about being bullied. They were crying on the way to work, feeling overwhelmed, belittled, lacking confidence. They were anxious, depressed, and developing physical symptoms. They're also injured and unwell. These are people who are trying to build close, calm relationships with small children. Children pick up on your emotions and well-being, as a baby's teacher even more so. When I'm distracted, upset, or not completely there in the moment, it affects all aspects of my role. None of this is of concern to the Ministry of Education because they call this employment issues. So what do the complaints going to the ministry look like? Well, here's another one that was quite recently sent to me. The centre has the TV on all the time, babysitting the children. Babies in the unders room, that's in the under twos room, are not seeing the outdoors in weeks. Non-movers are not sleeping in cots, just on one big mattress together. They had been on little pillows in the play area, and I told them this is a violation of the regs. I got told I'm a first-time mum. 15 stretchers in the whole centre of 100, children falling asleep where they lay. 1 to 2 teachers outside with more than 40 children. 3 teachers with more than 70 children. Teachers then getting blamed for multiple accidents on a daily basis. This is the kicker. I have not reported this to the ministry because I have had no faith in them to do anything. This lack of trust in the ministry is a real problem for teachers. When complaints come through to TAG, I ask them if they've been to the ministry. And these are some of the comments they tell me. I don't want to be known by them, it might affect my registration. Another teacher made a complaint, but when the employer found out, she was bullied until she left. I was told if I went to the MOE, there would be consequences. I contacted MOE, but I never heard from them and nothing happened. So this is an example of some complaints that are made about a particular chain of centres in Auckland. Am I allowed to? Maybe not for the moment. Talk to me later, I'll tell you who it is. The ministry received this number of complaints over 3 years, but they were also parent complaints. The ministry doesn't divide up the data between teachers and parents. I put out a call through TAG and social media for teachers to tell me their stories about this, and I got 25 complaints in a week, detailing all kinds of breaches and problems, and none of them had reported to the ministry. An example of one thing that happened there was when a colleague turned up at one of these centres as a reliever and asked who's in charge. She was asked, are you registered? And when she said, I am, they said, well, you are. That was just last year. I was a reliever in one of these centres last year. And in my professional opinion, there were children suffering there then. It's August now, isn't it? Yes, it's August now, and it's still going on. So the ministry isn't getting the real picture by any means. The MOE quotes that 5% are representing the least compliant centres. Well, without the teachers' input, how can they possibly know that? There has been a review of the complaints process within the ministry, and some good stuff has come out of it. They mentioned the Hawke's Bay office, and I've been in the Hawke's Bay office of the ministry, and big ups to them. They really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. But until teachers are protected lodging complaints, this is just guesswork. Overall, I think we can say that the system doesn't work. Back to Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Shall I just stick with this microphone? Is that easier? Yeah, okay. So just the reason I suggested not naming the particular chain is we're really, really keen to get people to understand that this is an across-the-board problem. This is from the biggest to the smallest providers. This is all over the country. And as soon as we're going to say, well, it's them or them, it gives the excuse for people to say, well, this is just a little problem with a few providers. No, it isn't, and we want to be really clear about that. Now, this is just my own estimate, okay? But I think you'll gather from the introduction that, you know, over 25, 27 years of work with the sector, about 1,500 visits, I have a picture. My picture is that maybe 25% of our centres might be actively beneficial. If I'm really generous, about 25% potentially damaging and probably mediocre in the middle, okay? It's a big problem that we have with quality. It's not just a few little centres. But having said that, I also really want to acknowledge the really good ones. Oh, actually, just before I do that, I just want to say that one of the things that's really clear in Susan's work is that teachers are scared to report. We simply don't protect them, and that was a failure in the review of the complaints process, is it did not tackle the protection of teachers. And until you do that, you have not got a reliable complaints process, and you're going to have serious situations not dealt with. But I just wanted to give you just a quick little photo montage of some beautiful things, just to say, yeah, we see it. I really want to say we love what some people are doing. And just that one in the top left-hand corner, I just took that photo a couple of days ago, and there are flowers in the middle of the table. There's a little tea-light candle. This was set up better than just about any cafe I've seen, and the food was cafe quality. It was really beautifully attractive food. The children were happy, they were relaxed. It was wonderful. I would have no hesitation in sending a child there. They're great. But they are working in an environment where there are other centres that other children go to that have got nothing like this quality. It's inequitable. So we just want to acknowledge the really good though. Another thing, really good, a big thank you to the people who wrote this. This is the draft strategic plan for early learning. And I want to say a big thank you to the Ministerial Advisory Group who worked on this, to all the people who listened. It was the best thing I'd seen come out of government probably since the mid-90s for the early childhood sector. So this was progress. And the biggest progress really was the first goal. I have never seen this in my life. Quality is raised for children by improving regulated standards. Never seen that for the sector before. Investment in our workforce supports excellence in teaching and learning. This is support for teachers. So good to see that. But unfortunately, there's a bit of a shadow over this, because I have talked to a number of teachers around the country in the past few months, to centre owners, and they do not have a confidence that the Ministry of Education can deliver this plan. There are problems in the structure and the operation of the ministry, and that's why we want to propose a different governance system. But not only that, the trigger for me to really say we've got to speak out about this again was this. The wellbeing budget. How good that we have a wellbeing budget. This is a good thing. But this statement is more like we're going to maintain the road toll and keep licensing fees down for cars, or we're going to maintain housing quality when we know we have serious problems with housing quality. Maintain is the wrong word. But when you put out false information to the public about the quality of a sector, you interfere with public policy, you interfere with expenditure, and you prevent the efforts and the money going where they need to. And that's why we have this statement, because the Ministry of Education did not alert the Minister or the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet to the real situation that we have in the early childhood sector. Because of that, 2 weeks ago, I wrote to the Secretary of Education and requested a retraction, a public retraction of these 3 statements. Now, in a moment, there we go. I'm going to read something from their reply, but I have it on my laptop so I can read it. And I also asked for an acknowledgement that there are serious matters of health, quality of care, and education to be attended to. I didn't receive a reply directly until this morning. Radio New Zealand got a reply from the ministry yesterday. And by the way, I had written acknowledging the work of the strategic plan and saying I would be really happy to meet and discuss these things. But I have found the Ministry of Education to be almost impervious to discussion and meetings. But this is the response that I had. And unfortunately, this isn't a PDF I couldn't highlight, so I'm going to have to find the text. So they said, 2 of the 3 statements you referred to were correct at the time of release, so we consider that no retraction is required. They said there are no international comparisons on the level of teacher qualifications, so the statement that New Zealand is in the top 3 for teacher qualifications in the world cannot be verified. Interestingly, that's the only statement they made that I didn't challenge. But they said that the ministry stopped making this statement over 3 years ago when this mistake was discovered. Now, what was the mistake that they made? The mistake was to make a claim that was completely unjustified, that they did not have the data for. Just as they made a claim of 98% compliance that was impossible for the ministry to make. They simply didn't have the data. I'm sorry, all 3 statements they made are wrong. They should not have made them. And so the request remains to the Secretary of Education, Iona Holstead, to retract these statements and make a true statement about the state of the sector, because we need to move forwards. This is not about trying to embarrass the ministry. It's just about being honest about the state that we're in, so that we can get the resources behind dealing with it. We have a huge number of solutions to the difficulties in the sector, many practical solutions that I have worked on, things I know Susan has worked on. We can't get them moving because we don't have the resources and we don't have the communication with the ministry. Okay, so the current system. This is carefully worded. Parents cannot rely on the current licensing and regulatory system to ensure adequate quality of care or education for their children. I'm not talking about high quality, I'm talking about adequate quality that you would be happy about having your child receive. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have your child in a good centre. It doesn't mean the centre that your child is going to is not good. It means you can't trust the regulatory and licensing system to ensure that. That system doesn't work, demonstrably from what Susan has told us and from the lack of things like checking ratios. If the ministry does not check the most important measure, which is ratios, then we don't have a quality check. Okay, another thing that I would say about a current system is that it doesn't serve the quality-based providers. And I really want the early childhood associations who represent providers to understand this, that they need to stand with their good providers and not see some kind of owner-teacher split or something. We need to pull the sector together so all the good people, the good teachers, the good providers, advocates like myself, not an early childhood teacher, are working together. So what I want to do is to introduce a potential solution. So this is moving from the current regulated licensing system to a contract for service system. So instead of the ministry having to take all comers, now the ministry gets to choose. So in the transition of these systems, you'd pretty much be deleting the license and it becomes a contract. Very little impact when it starts. But now you can no longer say, well, I'm tired of being the digger driver and I think I'll buy a childcare centre and buy some staff and, oh, don't you have to be qualified? Oh, yeah, okay, and make some money. No, can't do that now. You have to show, if you're setting up a new centre, that you have the experience and the knowledge to do it and the planning behind it. And if you're setting up a centre that, if you're already a provider, you're expanding, you want to increase the number of centres you have, that you have a good quality record. We'll look a little bit more closely at that. The ministry will be required to contract with better quality providers where they have a choice and to avoid contracts that place children at risk. It's not just about regulation compliance, it's about quality. The Ministry of Education will be responsible for care and quality of life, not just education. Care and quality of life are the platform of education. If you don't do those, you don't get good quality education. But since 1990, we haven't seen that. The ministry forgot about it when they took over childcare. So a new structure for the ministry. I need to say that the current ministry structures could not deliver the contracting service. So we need a separate section of the ministry specifically for early care and education, with the Deputy Secretary specifically responsible for that. I'd love to go through this in more detail, but we won't have time. I'm probably over time already. But I just want to point out particularly to a unit that is research quality and training, so that we have research embedded in the ministry specifically for early child education. Now, this is not like school. It's incredibly different to school. We're talking about babies 6 weeks old through to 5-year-olds. We're talking about a commercial sector, very different to school. We need that research there. The capacity and diversity management means you have a team that looks at forecasting population needs, communicates with communities through the sector communication and agency relationships team. And so they look at diversity like forest kindergartens, like supporting sessional early child education, supporting Pacifica centres who are struggling at the moment, supporting kohanga, that diversity. So that's the concept of the structure for the ministry. But looking at it in action, if we have, say, a 4-step quality rating, that's what ERO does at the moment, but the quality measures would be very different to ERO's. The first thing that you can see is that middle band, that if you want to expand your business, if you want to grow, you've got to get yourself into the good quality. At the moment, we have demonstrably poor quality centres. One person just in the past 2 weeks, described the experience of a large provider that expands just by buying centres, talked about the horrors of working for that organisation. So no, we don't want them growing. We want the good ones growing. If you look at the bottom 5%, just take an issue like retention. So if you have high staff turnover, that in itself is damaging to children, especially infants and toddlers. That damage to relationships is critical. So regardless of the cause, you just can't let it keep happening. But sitting behind that is likely to be things like potentially bullying or poor working conditions, noise. The way the system works is that you would red flag that contract and say, please explain. You know, you don't assume that you know what's going on, but you ask the centre to explain. Tell us what's going on. Identify why you have poor retention. What are you going to do about it? So you get 6 months then to put in place a plan and turn that retention around. If you don't, you're then on 6 months notice of end of contract. But the object is not to close centres, it's to get them to improve, to shift them back up that system so they move back up towards good. At the top of the system, because there will be some loss of centres, not a huge number, but some loss, and a need as the community, as the population grows for new ones, the ministry will be saying to good providers, please come to us, we love you. Would you like to take on something else in this community? It really works for good providers. Okay, just quickly towards the end, whoops. So the contracting process, transparent, public accessible, and with an appeal process. It's got to be ethical and fair. Quality measurements, I'll leave this for people to read on the recording of this, or you can get a copy of this from me. So quality of care, quality of environments, and added value for learning. This is not pedagogically prescriptive. It allows flexibility of types of learning styles, teaching styles, environments. Does it work to give children more than they had before? Teachers are regarded as colleagues of the ministry in this system. Instead of having to try and fight their way through complaints, teacher feedback is built into the quality assurance system. They're the people who see things every day, for goodness sake, get the information from them. So summing up, we're looking at choosing the best rather than the minimum. We're going for performance versus compliance, unreasonable risk is avoided, and we're looking at partnership with good providers. I want to appeal to the Minister of Health, so Minister of Education and the Minister of Health for that matter, but Minister of Education and the Prime Minister to please support the work that we're trying to do. The work that's going on behind the scenes around this model. There's a lot of work around the country being done on this at the moment, and the many other excellent solutions that we have for quality, to persuade the Ministry of Education to meet and to talk and to discuss. And if we can do that, if we can change the system, then I think we can finally say with truth, the mokopuna, the taonga. If anyone would like a copy of this, or would like a copy of the discussion document around the model, then please contact either myself or Susan. We'd love to hear from you. We want to have feedback. We want to have comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan and Mike. It's really great to have that focus on early childhood education. I think it's generally an area that public health has not paid a lot of attention to in New Zealand in the past, so it's good to be reminded of it regularly. Do we have any questions from the audience? Or either Susan or Mike? Philippa.
A brief comment. I think as Lucy and Julie here, who were the supervisors of Mike, you point to the lack of measurement, and I think that the fact that you did such a good thesis with such a lot of work means that you are speaking on the basis of evidence on these, which I think you did a very good interview on Morning Report, but I think you could highlight that this is not just anecdotes and observations are important, but they were underpinned by very solid evidence. So I applaud you, and great to have the teacher's view too.
Thanks, Philippa. Yes, I think that's something that is important for us Is that going? Yes. To emphasise that all of the things that we're bringing have a huge amount of research behind them, very carefully done. And certainly, as you're alluding to, Philippa, the PhD research is very, very much scrutinised. So it is accurate. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, so private ownership is not essentially the problem because, for example, all of those places that I showed the beautiful photographs of, let me see, 3 out of 4 of them were private ownership. One of them was kindergarten, which is now effectively still private ownership, the kindergarten associations of businesses. So, and some of the best people in the country serving children with brilliant concepts and designs are private companies. The problem is when your focus is on the profit, not the children. So if you make growth your objective, we want to be the biggest. This is simply a means to make money. Now you've got problems. It's the motivation behind the business rather than the business itself that matters.
Hi, Mike. Thank you very much for a great presentation. And Susan, congratulations on finishing your PhD. I'd just like to, have you got any comments? I mean, it just seems like a massive failure again of the complaint-based system, which New Zealand seems to be fairly reliant on in many sectors. I mean, the enforcement component. I mean, I know you did a really good, you know, relationship building and a lot of influencing stuff. But do you see a role for basically the, you know, really it's not good enough, you gone sort of approach to private sector stuff?
Do you want to answer that? Yeah.
I just want to say that the complaints process is really the only quality, teachers the quality control in this. And they've got nowhere to go, which is why TAG was built. And I would say to the Minister of Education that because he's got no data on staff retention, he's welcome to use mine. And TAG is quite a small group in comparison to the 30,000 early childhood teachers. So, you know, the problem's even bigger than what I'm bringing to this. And yes, definitely, teachers and relievers especially are saying to me every day, that centre should have been closed down a long time ago. And this is what worries me. They should be gone because it's the children that are suffering who are still in there.
I'll just add to that the contracting system is intended to move away from complaints-based reactions, and rather it uses a number of different kinds of measures. So it uses teacher feedback, parent feedback, spot checks, remote monitoring for environmental conditions. I'm working with some people in Auckland on this right now. In fact, that Lucy tipped me off to. These people are working on almost exactly the kinds of internet-connected devices that enable information for centres as well as national monitoring, and that enables the ministry to help people as well. So the models that we're looking at are incredibly positive instead of this negative, fear-based, complaints-based, control-based system that we have at the moment. We can do so much better. It's all there available to us.
Kia ora, and thanks for your talk. I was just wondering if the teachers have a union.
Yes, there is a union. NZEI is the union. It consists mainly of kindergarten teachers. I'm not sure how many kindergarten teachers are there now, but I have heard it's fewer than half. But in the private sector, there'd be very few teachers out of the 30,000 that belong to NZEI. So basically we are unrepresented, and that was something else that really concerned me, but I'm not quite ready to start a new union. TAG has to be it for now.
I think again on that point, that if we take that illustration of teacher retention and turnover, that immediately deals with so many quality issues that are impossible to measure. You know, how do you go into a centre and measure bullying? How do you put in place any regulations around bullying? But if you measure the outcome, which is retention, now you can do something about it. And so it's using intelligent ways of working, intelligent ways of measuring that drive that quality motivation, if I can put it that way. It's a much more positive system.
Kia ora.
I'm really, really touched that you guys are into this. I worked in early childhood for over 50 years, as my ear recognises. We just seem to find it so hard to get the traction going. We've got people in community centres who are working their butts off and really producing wonderful environments for children, thinking about how we can do things differently, how do we go with this community. Those ones are being closed, and we're having people fall out of the larger centres, thinking they'll go to the smaller centres, but the smaller centres aren't there. So anything that anyone in this room can do, please do it. Tell your friends that we have early childhood teachers who get minimum pay, and maybe if you're trained, you get $1 more an hour. But this is a really serious, serious thing, and I really acknowledge you too, and it's fantastic. Don't stop, and we're all beavering, but we've got to push it. Thank you. Kia ora.
Yes, and I'd just like to reinforce that there are some fabulous centres, and TAG would not be where it is now if it wasn't for owners who have devoted their lives to the betterment of children under 5, and they've been my mentors. Thank you.
We usually finish at one. Oh, is there an online question? No. We usually finish at 1:15, is that correct? So we might just draw it together there.
Well, can I just add one little bit to that last question?
Okay.
Just a second. Just
Sure.
a second. Just a second, because it's important. Yeah, is one of the problems that we have is a false divide between ownership and employer associations and organisations like TAG, but TAG has owners within it. It's not a divided organisation. It's not for or against anybody. It's for rights. And the one of the problems for the associations, that the associations of employers and owners, is that their members are getting damaged by bad practice in the sector by some of the people. So when you have predatory practices like you can have 2 months free childcare at our new centre we've just put into this place that's now oversupplied, that kills off some of the smaller centres. It's a very damaging practice. And so we want to work with the employer associations to try and protect everybody rather than have people exploited.
Just before you do that, my final suggestion is that you go and seek to talk to the Minister of Education, both of you, because you're working at the ministry, but I think you should present a summary and go and see.
Been there too.
We've tried.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.